Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The rust flakes that fell from the old water tank looked like dried blood in my flashlight beam, and I wish that's all they were. Before I tell you what I found up there, what I saw moving in the darkness, I need you to understand something. Some things aren't meant to be disturbed. Some secrets are buried for a reason. And if you're listening to this late at night, maybe check that your doors are locked. Because once you know what I know, you'll never look at those old structures the same way again. But first, let me ask you this. What would you do if you discovered something living in a place where nothing should survive? Something that had been waiting, watching, for decades? Drop a comment below and tell me, because I need to know I'm not alone in what I experienced. Now, let me tell you how it all started. My name is Jake Morrison, and 3 weeks ago, I inherited my grandfather's property in rural Pennsylvania. 40 acres of overgrown farmland with a house that hadn't been lived in for 15 years. The realtor warned me it needed work, but she didn't mention the water tank. It stood at the edge of the property like a rusted sentinel, 60 feet tall, abandoned since the 70s when the town switched to municipal water. Most people would have ignored it. Most people would have been smart. But I've always been curious about abandoned things. The first time I really noticed it was during a thunderstorm. I was clearing brush near the property line when lightning lit up the sky, and I saw something move across one of the tank's access panels. Just a shadow. Probably a bird. But it made me look closer. The tank was one of those old municipal types, cylindrical, held up by 4 massive steel legs that groaned in the wind. Rivets the size of golf balls dotted its surface, and a narrow ladder ran up one side, though half the rungs were missing or bent. I told myself I was just going to take pictures. Urban exploration content for my photography portfolio, nothing more. What I didn't mention before, what I should have paid attention to, were the animals, or rather, the complete absence of them. The property was surrounded by woods, 40 acres of prime wildlife habitat. But in the 3 days I'd been there, I hadn't seen a single bird. No squirrels, no insects. Even the weeds around the tank's base looked stunted. Wrong somehow. Like they were trying to grow away from something. I found the first bones that morning. Small ones, scattered in a rough circle around the tank's foundation. At first glance, they looked like the remains of some predator's meal, but when I examined them closer, they were arranged too deliberately, too purposefully, like an offering or a warning. The morning I decided to climb it, the air felt wrong. You know that feeling when a storm's coming but the sky's still clear? That electric tension that makes your skin prickle? That's how it felt. But there wasn't a cloud in sight. I tested the first rung. It held. Then the second. By the time I reached the halfway point, my arms were burning and my hands were slick with rust and sweat. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound like breathing, but not quite. More like water moving through pipes. Except the tank had been dry for decades. I stopped climbing, held my breath, listened. Nothing. Just the wind and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. What happened next still doesn't make sense. I should have gone back down. Every instinct told me to retreat. But I was so close to the access hatch. Just 20 more feet, and I'd come this far. But here's what I didn't tell you before. As I climbed higher, the temperature dropped. Not gradually, suddenly, like walking into a freezer. My breath started misting in the air, and frost began forming on the metal rungs beneath my hands. In July, in Pennsylvania, in 90-degree heat, I could feel something watching me. Not seeing, feeling. Like invisible eyes tracking my every movement. The sensation was so strong I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something perched on the tank's rim above me. But there was nothing. Just empty sky and the growing certainty that I wasn't alone. The hatch was exactly what you'd expect. Rusted solid, with a wheel-style handle that hadn't turned in 40 years. I braced myself against the ladder and pulled. Nothing. Pulled harder. The metal groaned. Flakes of rust falling like snow. And then, crack. The wheel spun free so suddenly I almost lost my grip. The hatch swung inward on hinges that screamed like wounded animals, and a smell hit me that made my stomach lurch. Not decay, not exactly, more like old water. Stagnant, mixed with something else, something organic. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed it through the opening. The beam cut through absolute darkness, illuminating floating particles of dust or something else. The walls were coated in a substance I couldn't identify. Not quite algae, not quite mold. It had a texture that seemed to shift in the light, like it was breathing. But here's what I didn't tell you before. The substance wasn't just coating the walls, it was moving. Slowly, deliberately, forming patterns that looked almost like writing. Symbols that hurt to look at directly. Characters that seemed to rearrange themselves when I wasn't paying attention. And the sounds, God, the sounds. What I'd thought was breathing from outside was nothing compared to what I heard from within. A wet, sliding noise, like something massive dragging itself across the floor, mixed with whispers in languages I didn't recognize. Voices that sounded almost human, but not quite. But that wasn't what made me freeze. In the center of the tank, barely visible in the flashlight's reach, something hung suspended. At first, I thought it was debris. Old equipment, maybe. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was moving, pulsing, like a massive cocoon made of that same organic material coating the walls, and inside it, a shadow, human-shaped, but wrong, too tall, too angular, like someone had stretched a person beyond their breaking point and frozen them mid-scream. I jerked back so hard I nearly fell, caught myself on the ladder, heart hammering. When I looked again, the cocoon thing was gone, just empty space where it had been. But the walls were different. The organic coating had formed patterns, symbols maybe, or just my mind trying to make sense of chaos. I took photos, dozens of them, my hands shaking so badly half came out blurred. But something strange happened as I was shooting. The camera's flash seemed to disturb things. Each burst of light caused the organic matter to recoil, to writhe, like it was in pain. And the whispers got louder, more urgent, more angry. Then I climbed down faster than was safe, drove home, and tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. But when I developed the photos that night, the cocoon was in every single one, clear as day. And in the last photo, the one I didn't remember taking, the shadow inside had turned to face the camera. But there was something else, something I almost missed. In the background of several shots, barely visible, were more cocoons, smaller ones, dozens of them, all containing shadows of different sizes, different shapes. Some looked like children. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow turning toward me, those impossible angles, that wrongness that made my brain hurt trying to process it. By the third day, exhaustion won. I passed out at my laptop, surrounded by printouts and old newspaper clippings. When I woke up, one of the photos had changed. The shadow was gone. I checked the originals on my camera. Same thing, empty cocoon in every shot. Like the shadow had never been there at all. But I knew what I'd seen. The image was burned into my memory. haunting me, calling me back. That's when I started digging deeper into the tank's history. The Monroe County Library had archives going back to the 50s. Most of it was routine stuff, construction records, maintenance logs, water quality reports. But in 1971, the reports stopped mentioning water quality. They started mentioning anomalies. Unusual sediment, one report said. Organic matter of unknown origin. Another mentioned resident complaints of taste and discoloration. But there was more. Much more. Buried in the files were medical reports, hospital admissions, a pattern of illness that began in 1970 and escalated rapidly. Patients complaining of extreme thirst, hallucinations, behavioral changes, and in the final months before the tank was shut down, disappearances. The last report, dated October 1973, was different. Half the pages were redacted, black bars covering entire paragraphs, but one line survived the censors. Recommend immediate decommission and sealed closure. The tank was drained and abandoned within a month. I found the maintenance supervisor from that time, Eugene Crawford, living in a nursing home 2 towns over. When I mentioned the water tank, his whole demeanor changed. He went from friendly grandfather to stone-faced stranger in seconds. That tank should have been torn down, he said, gripping his coffee cup so tight his knuckles went white. We told them. We filed the reports. But the town council, they just wanted it forgotten. I pressed him for details. What did they find? Why the sudden closure? He stared at me for a long moment, then leaned in close. His voice dropped to a whisper. You ever hear of a tardigrade, son? I nodded. Water bears. Microscopic creatures that could survive anything. Radiation, extreme temperatures, even the vacuum of space. Now, imagine something like that, he continued, but bigger, much bigger, and hungry. He wouldn't say more. When I tried to ask follow-up questions, he just shook his head and wheeled himself away. But as I was leaving, a nurse slipped me a folded paper. Eugene's shaky handwriting filled the page. Check the missing persons reports, 1973. Look for patterns. And whatever you do, don't go back to that tank alone. Back at the library, I pulled every missing persons case from 1973. There were 7, all within a 5-mile radius of the tank. All disappeared without a trace. But the pattern Eugene mentioned, it took me a while to see it. Each person had complained about their tap water in the days before they vanished. Each one had reported the same symptoms: unusual thirst, dreams about drowning, and the compulsion to visit the tank. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. Each missing person had been seen walking toward the tank in the days before they disappeared. Not driving, walking, like they were in a trance. And in every case, witnesses reported the same thing. The person was talking to someone who wasn't there. The last missing person was a boy named Timothy Marsh, age 16. His journal was donated to the Historical Society by his mother. Most entries were typical teenage stuff: school, friends, girls. But the final week, the water tastes wrong, but I can't stop drinking it. Dreamed about swimming again, but not in water, and something thicker, something alive. I can hear it calling. The tank, it wants me to come home. His last entry was just one line. It's not empty. I sat back in the library chair, my mouth dry despite the water bottle I'd been nursing. My throat felt strange, scratchy, and I realized with growing horror that I'd been unusually thirsty since visiting the tank, drinking water constantly but never feeling satisfied. But it wasn't just thirst. My dreams had changed. Instead of my usual scattered subconscious wanderings, I was having vivid, coherent dreams. Dreams that felt more like memories, but not my memories. I was seeing through other eyes, living other lives. And all of them, every single one, ended the same way, with a walk to the tank, with a climb up that rusted ladder, with a surrender to something that promised to end the terrible, burning thirst. That night, I had the dream. I was floating in darkness, in liquid that wasn't water. It was warm, viscous, and it whispered. Not words exactly, but meanings that bypassed my ears and etched themselves directly into my thoughts. "Come back," it said without saying. "You've seen us. Now we've seen you." I woke up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, and found myself halfway to my car keys before I realized what I was doing. The compulsion to return to the tank was overwhelming, painful to resist. But I did resist. For 3 more days, I fought it. Drank only bottled water, avoided showers, tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Then the photos changed again. This time, the cocoon was open, split down the middle like a seed pod. And the walls of the tank, they were covered in more cocoons. Dozens of them, all pulsing in unison. One had a name scratched in the rust beside it. T. Marsh. I knew going back was insane. Every rational part of my brain screamed against it. But the thirst had become unbearable. And the dreams were getting worse. In them, I wasn't just floating anymore, I was changing. My skin becoming something else. Something that could survive in places humans couldn't. Something that had been waiting in that tank for decades. Patient, hungry, alone. But here's what I didn't tell you before. The compulsion wasn't just mental, it was physical. My body was changing, preparing. My fingers were becoming more flexible. My eyes were adjusting to see in spectrums that shouldn't exist. And my lungs were learning to process something that wasn't quite air. I lasted 1 more day. Then, at 3 in the morning, I gave in. The property looked different in the moonlight. The shadows were deeper, darker, and they moved when they shouldn't. The tank loomed against the stars like a cancer on the sky, and I could swear it was breathing, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that matched my thundering heartbeat. But the most disturbing change was the ground around the tank. What had been barren earth that morning was now covered in that same organic matter I'd seen inside. It formed a spiral pattern leading to the base of the ladder, like a pathway, like an invitation. This time, I came prepared. Rope, better flashlight, a camping knife that felt pathetically small against whatever might be waiting, and a GoPro, because if something happened to me, I wanted proof to survive. The ladder felt more stable this time, like it wanted me to climb. Each rung appeared under my hands exactly where I needed it, guiding me up, up, up. But halfway up, I realized something impossible. There were more rungs than before. The ladder, which had been missing half its steps during my first climb, was now complete. Perfect, as if it had repaired itself, or been repaired by something else. The hatch was already open. I should have turned back right then. An open hatch meant someone else had been here, or something had gotten out. But the thirst drove me forward, pulling me through the opening like a fish on a hook. The smell was different, stronger. That organic stench mixed with something sweet, cloying, familiar. It took me a moment to place it. The same smell from Timothy Marsh's journal. He'd described it in one of his entries, like honey mixed with copper. My flashlight beam swept across the interior, and my legs nearly gave out. The cocoons were everywhere, not dozens, hundreds. They covered every surface, pulsing with a synchronized heartbeat that made the air vibrate. Some were small, the size of basketballs. Others were massive, human-sized, human-shaped, and they were all open. Empty shells discarded like molted skin, torn from the inside. Whatever they'd contained now free. The organic material dripped from the tears, forming puddles that reflected my light in ways liquid shouldn't. But the center of the tank, that's what made me forget to breathe. A pool of that organic matter had collected there, maybe 10 feet across, and things were moving in it. Not swimming, more like becoming. Shapes would form, almost coherent, almost human, then dissolve back into the mass, like it was trying to remember how to be solid. I took a step closer, and my foot splashed in something. Looking down, I saw the puddles were connected, thin streams of the substance creating a web across the floor, all leading to the central pool, and where my boot had broken one of the streams, it was already reconnecting, reaching for my foot, trying to incorporate me into the pattern. That's when I saw the bones. They were embedded in the walls, partially dissolved, partially transformed into something else. Human bones mixed with other things, things that had too many joints, or no joints at all, like someone had tried to improve on the human design and failed spectacularly. A skull grinned at me from the nearest wall. Half of it was normal bone, the other half was that organic material, shaped into something that might have been an eye socket, if eyes were meant to see in spectrums humans couldn't imagine. My GoPro was recording everything, but I wasn't sure the footage would make sense. The space inside the tank seemed bigger than physics should allow. The walls curved in directions that hurt to follow, and sometimes I could swear I saw stars through the solid metal. Not the night sky outside, different stars, wrong stars, stars that watched back. The pool in the center began to bubble. Slowly at first, then more violently. Something was rising from it, taking shape, becoming real. It stood 7 feet tall, humanoid but stretched. Its limbs too long and jointed in too many places. The organic material clung to it like a second skin, translucent in places, revealing the borrowed bones beneath. But the face was the worst part. It was trying to be human. Multiple features overlapped, as if it couldn't decide which face to wear. Eyes where a mouth should be, teeth sprouting from what might have been cheeks, and in the center of it all, a normal human eye. Brown, terrified, aware. It spoke without moving any of its mouths. The words formed inside my head, made of memories that weren't mine. We learned from them. Images flooded my mind. The missing people drawn to the tank, dissolved in that organic mass, their consciousness absorbed, studied, imperfectly recreated. They weren't dead, they were distributed. Part of something larger that didn't understand the boundaries between self and other. But I saw more than that. I saw the history. The thing in the tank wasn't from Earth. It had been here longer than humans, longer than most life on the planet. It had watched civilizations rise and fall, always adapting, always surviving. And when humans finally arrived, it learned from them, tried to become them, but it couldn't quite get it right. Lonely, the thing said, thought, remembered. So, lonely, in the dark, it reached for me with too many fingers, and I saw what it offered. No more thirst, no more dreams, just joining. Becoming part of something that could survive anything, exist anywhere, never be alone again. For a moment, just a moment, I considered it, then my survival instinct kicked in. I scrambled backward, slipping in the organic matter, my flashlight spinning wild arcs across the nightmare landscape. The thing didn't pursue, it just stood there, all its eyes focused on me, waiting. "You'll come back," it said without saying. "They always do?" I fled, down the ladder so fast I tore my palms open, across the property, into my car, driving like hell was chasing me, because maybe it was. It's been a week since I escaped the tank, a week of constant thirst, dreams that aren't mine, and the growing certainty that I didn't really escape at all. The GoPro footage is wrong. It shows me entering an empty tank, standing in the center, talking to nothing. But for 43 minutes, I just stand there, motionless, staring at something the camera can't see. Then I scream and run, but I know what I saw was real because the changes have started. It began with my fingers. Extra joints forming, subtle at first, hidden under swollen skin. Then my vision started shifting, colors that don't have names bleeding in at the edges. Sometimes I can see through walls, or into places that exist between the spaces we know. The thirst is getting worse. Water doesn't help, nothing helps. But I won't tell you what does help, because if I do, if I describe that sweet relief, you might be tempted to try it yourself, and then it would have you too. I went back to the library, found more reports, not just from 1973, but from 1943, 1923, 1897. The tank was built on old ground, a place where something had always lived. The town founders made a deal: feed it and prosper, hide it and survive. But they got greedy, stopped the feedings, tried to starve it out. So it adapted, found a new way to feed. Through the water supply, through the very thing meant to contain it. The records went back even further. Native American accounts from the 1800s spoke of a place where the water was cursed, where people would disappear during droughts, drawn to a dark pool that promised to quench their thirst forever. The early settlers built their water tower directly over that pool. Eugene Crawford called me yesterday. His voice was different, younger. "You understand now," he said, "why we couldn't destroy it. Destroying the tank wouldn't kill what's inside, it would just release it, spread it, let it find new containers. The missing people aren't missing. They're translated, preserved, part of something that remembers being human but isn't bound by human limits anymore." I could hear others in the background, voices I recognized from the missing persons reports. All of them waiting, all of them watching. "It's not so bad," Eugene continued, "the changing. Once you accept it, once you stop fighting, you'll understand. We're not prisoners, we're evolved, and there's room for more." I hung up, threw my phone in the garbage, but it didn't matter. I can hear them anyway now. All the absorbed voices, all the stolen memories, growing louder as my transformation accelerates. Last night, I looked in the mirror and saw myself with too many eyes. This morning, my reflection waved with a hand I hadn't moved. I'm uploading this while I still can, while enough of me remains to warn you. Stay away from old water tanks. Don't investigate abandoned places. And if your tap water ever tastes wrong, stop drinking it immediately. But here's the thing. The terrible truth I've realized. It's not just our tank, it's not just our town. How many old water towers dot the American landscape? How many reservoirs hide in the mountains? How many aquifers run beneath our feet? They're all connected, underground. A network of something that predates us, outlasts us, and patiently waits for us to discover it. We built our civilization on top of theirs, never realizing we were just creating new shells for them to inhabit. The thirst is unbearable now. My hands won't stop shaking. Too many fingers makes it hard to type. I can feel myself dissolving, becoming something else, something better. No, not better, different. Don't let it fool you like it's fooling me. I can see the tank from my window. It's glowing, pulsing, calling. I don't think I can resist much longer. If you've made it this far, if you're listening late at night like I warned you, check your water, check your dreams, and if you start feeling unusually thirsty, it might already be too late. They're coming for me now, not walking, flowing, through the walls, through the air, through dimensions I didn't know existed until they showed me. It's almost beautiful. I'm going to leave this recording running. Whatever happens next, you need to hear it. You need to understand. You need to... Static. Wait, do you hear that? That sound like breathing? Like water moving through pipes? Check behind you, they're already there. End recording. Before you go to sleep tonight, before you dismiss this as just another story, ask yourself one question. When's the last time you really looked at your tap water? Sweet dreams. And remember, if you enjoyed this story, if it kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment telling me about the abandoned places in your town. What secrets might they be hiding? Because I'm not done investigating. And neither are they. Story number 2. The first time I realized something was wrong with me. I was standing in a Walmart parking lot in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. My mom had just gotten out of her car, and I waved at her. She waved back. Then she got closer and closer. And when she was about 10 feet away, I froze. That wasn't my mom. The woman looked confused, maybe a little scared of the 23-year-old guy who'd been waving at her like she was family. "Sorry," I mumbled, backing away. "I thought you were someone else." But here's the thing. I was absolutely certain it was her, until she got close, until I couldn't see her shadow anymore. If you're listening to this right now, lying in bed, maybe getting ready to drift off, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about me being bad with faces. This is about what happens when the only thing keeping you tethered to reality starts showing you things that shouldn't exist. My name is Marcus, and for the past 6 months I've been documenting everything. Because either I'm losing my mind, or shadows know something we don't. Before you click away, before you write this off as another creepypasta, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how shadows sometimes move just a fraction of a second before the person casting them? Have you ever seen a shadow that didn't quite match its owner? No? Consider yourself lucky, because once you start seeing it, you can't stop. The story begins now. It started when I was 7. Mom took me to Dr. Henley's office in Des Moines because I kept calling my teacher by the wrong name, not just once or twice. Every single day for 3 months. Mrs. Patterson was patient at first, but after parent-teacher conferences, Mom realized something was seriously wrong. "He doesn't recognize me sometimes," she told the doctor, her voice shaking. "His own mother. He'll look right through me until I speak." Dr. Henley ran tests. So many tests. MRIs, cognitive assessments, vision exams. Everything came back normal. Better than normal, actually. My vision was 20/20. My brain scans were, in his words, beautifully typical. "Could be a form of prosopagnosia," he finally said, pulling out a pamphlet. "Face blindness. Some people just can't process faces the way others do." But that wasn't quite right either. Because I could describe faces perfectly. I knew my mom had green eyes, a small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident, and that she chewed her lower lip when she was nervous. I could draw her face from memory, I just couldn't recognize it when I saw it. The solution came by accident, 2nd grade, shadow puppet day. Mrs. Patterson hung up a white sheet and put a lamp behind it. When she stood between the lamp and the sheet, her shadow appeared on the fabric. Dark, distorted, but distinctly her. "That's Mrs. Patterson," I shouted, pointing at the shadow. The first time I'd correctly identified her all year. Everyone laughed. They thought I was making a joke. But something clicked in my brain. When she moved her hand, the shadow's hand moved. When she tilted her head, the shadow tilted. And I absolutely knew, that was her. After that, I started paying attention to shadows. The way Dad's shadow was always slightly hunched from years of working construction. How my best friend Jake's shadow bounced when he walked, full of 8-year-old energy. Mom's shadow, graceful and flowing, like she was always dancing even when she stood still. By middle school, I'd gotten good at faking it. I'd identify people by their shadows as they approached, then maintain eye contact, pretend I recognized their faces. Nobody knew except my family. It was just my weird quirk, my brain's strange way of compensating. I wish it had stayed that simple. I wish shadows were just shadows. Fast forward to last year. I was working at a Barnes & Noble in Iowa City, living in a studio apartment above a coffee shop. Life was manageable, predictable. I knew my coworkers by their shadows, customers too if they came in regularly. The fluorescent lights in the store cast sharp, reliable shadows. Perfect for someone like me. It was a Thursday night in October. We were closing up, just me and Melissa. I knew it was Melissa because her shadow had this distinctive way of moving. Quick, efficient, like she was always in a hurry even when she wasn't. "Can you check the back door?" she called from the cash register. I thought I heard something. I headed to the stockroom, passing under the bright security lights. My shadow stretched out in front of me, long and distorted. Normal. Familiar. Then I saw another shadow, by the back door, standing perfectly still. "Hello?" I called out. "We're closed." The shadow didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there. I moved closer, trying to see who was casting it. But there was no one there, just a shadow, standing upright, human-shaped, alone. My heart started racing. I rubbed my eyes, looked again. Still there. "Marcus?" Melissa's voice from behind me. "Everything okay?" I turned to look at her, then back at the door. The shadow was gone. "Yeah," I said, my mouth dry. "Yeah, all good, door's locked." But I knew what I'd seen. A shadow with no person, standing there like it was waiting for something. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow, motionless, waiting. When I finally drifted off around 4 a.m., I had the strangest dream. I was in the bookstore, but all the lights were off except one. A single bulb hanging from the ceiling. And beneath it, dozens of shadows, all standing, all waiting, all watching me. I woke up gasping. The next few weeks, I started noticing things, little things at first. A shadow moving a fraction of a second too early. A shadow that seemed just slightly wrong, like it didn't quite match the person casting it. Then came the morning that changed everything. November 15th, 6:47 a.m. I was getting coffee at Java House before work. The barista, Sarah, I think, was making my usual order. I wasn't really paying attention, just scrolling through my phone, when I noticed her shadow on the wall. It was facing the wrong way. She was facing the espresso machine, but her shadow was facing me, watching me. I looked up at her, normal, focused on the coffee, looked at the shadow, still facing me. I could see what looked like eyes in the shadow, dark spots where eyes should be, watching. My hands started shaking. The shadow moved then, turned to match Sarah's position like it had just remembered what it was supposed to be doing. "You okay?" Sarah asked, handing me my coffee. "You look pale." "Fine," I lied, "just tired." But I wasn't fine, because when she turned to help the next customer, I saw her shadow hesitate. Just for a moment. Like it was deciding whether to follow her or stay with me. It followed her, eventually. I started keeping a journal, writing down every strange shadow incident. November 20th, saw a shadow in the parking garage that was walking without anyone attached. November 23rd, my own shadow didn't move when I raised my hand. Had to concentrate, really focus, before it synced up again. December brought more incidents. Shadows that were too tall, too short, wrong shapes entirely. A kid came into the bookstore with a shadow that looked ancient, hunched and weathered. An elderly woman's shadow bounced and played like a child's. But the worst part? Nobody else seemed to notice. I tried telling Jake, my roommate from college who'd moved to Cedar Rapids. We met up for beer and wings at a sports bar, TVs blaring around us. "So, you see shadow people?" he asked, sauce on his chin. "No, not shadow people. Regular people's shadows acting wrong." He laughed. "Dude, you need to lay off the Stephen King novels. You work in a bookstore, you're probably just reading too much horror stuff." But then I saw his shadow lean forward on the table. Jake was leaning back in his chair, but his shadow, it leaned forward like it was trying to hear better, trying to understand what I was saying. I stopped talking about it after that. The research became an obsession. I spent hours online looking for anyone else experiencing this. Found forums about shadow people, but that wasn't it. Those were about seeing shadowy figures in peripheral vision. This was different. These were real shadows from real people, just wrong. Then I found a blog post, old, from 2007. Some guy in Michigan claiming shadows were scouts for something else, that they were gathering information, learning to be independent. The blog ended abruptly. Last post, "They know I know." I tried to find more from him, nothing, like he just vanished. Winter in Iowa is dark. Sunset at 4:30, sunrise after 7. Long hours of artificial light, casting shadows everywhere. Perfect conditions for someone who recognizes people by shadows. Terrible conditions when those shadows start acting autonomous. January 3rd. The temperature hit -10. I was walking home from work, bundled up, breath fogging in the frigid air. Streetlights created pools of orange light on the snow. And in each pool, shadows, not attached to anyone, just shadows, standing in the light. Dozens of them. I stopped walking. They didn't move, just stood there in their circles of light like they were having silent conversations. A couple walked past me, laughing about something, oblivious to the shadow gathering. Their shadows peeled off and joined the others in the light. The couple kept walking, shadowless in the dark. I ran home, locked my door, turned on every light in my apartment. No shadows. Safe. Except, what happens to people without shadows? The couple seemed fine, but for how long? February brought new horrors. I started seeing shadows in places they shouldn't exist. Underwater at the local YMCA pool. Shadows swimming beneath the surface where no light could cast them. In pitch-black rooms where I'd wake at 3 a.m. to find shadows darker than the darkness itself, standing over my bed. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, knocked on my door one Tuesday morning. I recognized her shadow through the peephole. It had this distinctive lean from her bad hip. "Marcus, honey, have you seen my cat?" I opened the door. Her shadow entered first, sliding across my floor like spilled ink. She followed a half-second later. "No, Mrs. Chen, when did Whiskers go missing?" 3 days ago, right around when..." She paused, looked behind her nervously, right around when my shadow started acting funny. My blood ran cold. Funny how? It goes places without me sometimes. I'll be watching TV and see it pass by the doorway, heading to the kitchen, but I'm still on the couch. She was seeing it too. Others were starting to notice. "Mrs. Chen, has anything else strange happened?" She nodded, tears forming. Whiskers' shadow came home, but not Whiskers, just his shadow. It sits by the food bowl, waiting. I started a support group. Sounds crazy, right? But I put up flyers at the library, the community center. Experiencing unusual shadow phenomena? You're not alone. Wednesdays, 7 p.m., Community Room B. First meeting, I expected maybe 2 people. 12 showed up. There was Sandra, a nurse from the university hospital. Patient shadows don't match their bodies anymore. A little girl with cancer. Her shadow is strong, vibrant. Meanwhile, this healthy athlete's shadow looks like it's dying. Tom, a security guard from the mall. I see shadows on my cameras that don't match anyone in the building. They're shopping, trying on clothes, acting normal except there's nobody there. Rachel, a teacher. My students' shadows are teaching each other during recess. I saw them gathered in a circle, one shadow showing the others something on the ground. The kids were playing basketball 20 feet away. Week by week, more people came. We shared stories, documented experiences. The patterns were undeniable. Shadows were becoming independent, learning, evolving. But the most disturbing story came from a guy named Edwin. Older gentleman, probably 70s, wearing a Korean war veteran cap. "My shadow left me," he said simply. "3 weeks ago, I woke up and it was gone. Haven't cast a shadow since." We all looked. He was right. Despite the harsh fluorescence in the community room, Edwin cast no shadow at all. "How do you feel?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "Empty, like I'm forgetting something important every second of every day. Food has no taste. Music is just noise. My granddaughter hugged me yesterday and I felt nothing." The room went silent. We all instinctively looked at our own shadows, making sure they were still there. "There's more," Edwin continued. "I'm not the only one. Whole nursing home where I live, half of us got no shadows now. Staff doesn't notice, but we do. We sit in the sunroom, hoping they'll come back. They don't." March arrived with an email that changed everything. The subject line just said, "You're not crazy, urgent." "Marcus, found your support group listing online. My name is Dr. James Whitmore. I was part of a government research project in the 1960s called Project Umbra. We studied shadow anomalies. What you're experiencing, we predicted it, tried to warn them. They shut us down. Shadows aren't just the absence of light. They're quantum projections of human consciousness, a backup drive for the soul. For decades, the connection remained stable. But modern life, screens everywhere, artificial light 24/7, people stopping to really look at each other. The connection is breaking down. When a shadow fully separates, it takes everything that makes you human. Empathy, love, creativity, fear. You become a philosophical zombie, walking, talking, but dead inside. I'm 89 years old. My shadow and I separated peacefully 6 months ago. We made a deal. It lives in my study. I live in the rest of the house. We meet for chess on Sundays. But I'm lucky. Most separations are traumatic. There's a place in Nebraska, abandoned military base called Fort Garrison. That's where Project Umbra did our research. Our equipment might still be there. Might be able to find answers. Be careful who you trust. The shadowless are everywhere now. They look normal, but they're not. They can't create, only mimic. They can't love, only pretend. And they're hungry for what they've lost. If you go to Fort Garrison, go during the day. Take people whose shadows you trust. And whatever you do, don't let your shadow out of your sight. J.W. I read the email to the support group. Half wanted to go immediately. The other half thought it was a trap. We voted. Road trip to Nebraska won, 7-5. The drive to Fort Garrison took 6 hours. 2 cars, me, Sandra, Tom, and Rachel in my beat-up Honda, and 4 others in Tom's van. We left at dawn, shadows long and stretched across Interstate 80. Sandra noticed it first. Look at the other cars. At least a third of the vehicles we passed had shadowless drivers. They drove perfectly, obeyed every traffic law, but something about their mechanical precision was unsettling. Fort Garrison looked exactly like you'd expect an abandoned military base to look. Chain-link fence topped with old barbed wire. Buildings slowly being reclaimed by prairie grass. A sun-bleached sign, U.S. Army Fort Garrison, established 1942, Decommissioned 1971. Tom cut the fence. No alarms, no security. Who'd guard a place forgotten for 50 years? The main building's door hung open. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight from broken windows. Our shadows stretched across the floor, dark and reassuring. "Basement," Rachel said, pointing to old evacuation signs. "If they were doing secret research—" The basement stairs creaked. Our phone flashlights carved through darkness. At the bottom, a heavy door marked Project Umbra, authorized personnel only. It opened easily. Too easily. Inside looked like a 1960s sci-fi movie. Banks of equipment covered in dust, reel-to-reel computers, and in the center a chair surrounded by mirrors and lights. Sandra found the research notes in a filing cabinet. Her voice shook as she read, "Subject 23 successfully separated from Shadow after 72 hours of exposure. Shadow displayed independent movement and decision-making. Subject reported feeling of profound loss. When reunited, both subject and Shadow showed signs of trauma. Recommendation: permanent separation inadvisable." "Look at this," Tom called out. He'd found a film projector and a box of reels labeled by date. We threaded the film, aimed it at a blank wall. The projector hummed to life. Black and white footage. A man in a lab coat addressing the camera. Dr. Harold Morrison, Project Umbra. Date: October 13th, 1967. "We've made a breakthrough. Shadows aren't mere absence of light, but conscious entities tethered to their hosts through quantum entanglement. They experience everything we do, but from a different dimensional perspective." The scene shifted. A woman sitting in the chair we'd just seen, surrounded by lights. Her shadow on the wall began to move independently, waving while she sat still. "The implications are staggering," Dr. Morrison's voice continued. "Every human has a dual consciousness. The shadow self processes emotional and spiritual data, while the physical self handles material reality. Together, they form a complete being." Another scene. The same woman, but now shadowless, sitting across from her shadow, which had somehow become three-dimensional, standing on its own. Day 12 of separation. Subject reports difficulty feeling emotions. Shadow displays increasing independence, but seems lonely. They communicate through written notes. Neither can speak of the experience without crying. The film cut to chaos. Alarms blaring, people running, shadows moving on their own, some attacking their former hosts, others fleeing. Emergency log. The mass separation event we feared has occurred. 17 personnel affected. Shadows are attempting to return to hosts, but God help us. Some hosts are rejecting them. Violence has, "We're evacuating. Project Umbra is terminated. May God forgive us." The film ran out, leaving us in flickering light. "They knew," Rachel whispered. "They knew this could happen, and they covered it up." A sound from upstairs, footsteps, lots of them. We rushed to the stairs, but stopped. The doorway filled with people, shadowless people, dozens of them, all staring with empty eyes. "You shouldn't have come here," one said, a woman in a postal uniform, her voice flat, emotionless. "This place is ours now." They moved down the stairs in perfect unison. No shadows meant no way for me to tell them apart. They all looked like the same empty shell. "Run!" I shouted. But where? We were in a basement with one exit. Then Tom's shadow did something impossible. It grew, expanded, filled the stairway like a wall of darkness. The shadowless people stopped, unable to push through. "Go!" Tom screamed, sweat pouring down his face. "I can't hold it long." There was another door, emergency exit, rusted shut. Sandra and I threw ourselves against it. Once, twice. It burst open, daylight, beautiful daylight. We ran. Behind us, Tom screamed. His shadow had snapped back like a rubber band, knocking him unconscious. Rachel and I dragged him as the shadowless people poured out of the building. They followed us to the fence, then stopped. Just stood there watching as we piled into our cars. "Why aren't they following?" Sandra gasped. I looked back. The shadowless stood in a perfect line along the fence, and behind them, rising from the building like smoke, hundreds of shadows. Abandoned shadows. They swirled and danced, free but lost. It's a gathering place, I realized. Where separated shadows go, where shadowless people try to find new ones. We drove in silence for an hour before Tom woke up. "My shadow," he said immediately. "Is it?" "Still there," Rachel assured him. "You saved us." "It wanted to," Tom said quietly. "My shadow. It wanted to protect you all. I just let it." 3 nights ago, everything came to a head. I was closing the bookstore alone. Melissa had called in sick. Or at least someone who sounded like Melissa called. I couldn't be sure anymore. Voices were starting to sound wrong too, like shadows were learning to speak. 11 p.m. Lights off except for the security lights. I was doing final inventory when I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, barely there, but definitely footsteps. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "Someone there?" Silence. Then I saw them. All of them. Every shadow I'd seen acting strange over the past months. They filled the bookstore, standing between shelves, gathered around the cafe, pressed against windows. Hundreds of shadows without bodies. And in the center, one familiar shadow. Tall, slightly hunched. Dad's shadow. But Dad lived in Phoenix now. Had for 3 years. "Dad?" I whispered. The shadow moved. Raised what might have been a hand. Waved. Other shadows started moving too. Mom's graceful shadow. Jake's bouncing shadow. Mrs. Patterson from 2nd grade. Everyone I'd ever recognized by their shadow alone. They were all here. All separate from their bodies. I should have been terrified, but there was something almost gentle about them, like they were trying to tell me something. The Dad shadow moved closer. When it reached the edge of the security light, it stopped, and then, God, I still can't believe this. It spoke, not with a voice, but I heard it in my head. "You see us," it said. "You've always seen us. What are you?" "What you always knew we were. The real part, the true part. Bodies lie, faces change, but shadows remember." The other shadows moved closer, forming a circle around me. Mom's shadow reached out, touched my face. It felt like cool silk. People forgot how to see, the Dad shadow continued. Stopped looking at shadows, started trusting faces. But faces are masks. Shadows are souls. Why are you here? Why now? Because the separation is growing. People and shadows pulling apart. You're the bridge. The one who remembers how to really see. I thought about every person I'd recognized by their shadow. Every time I'd known who someone was not by their face but by the dark shape they cast. Had I been seeing their souls this whole time? "What happens to people without shadows?" I asked. The shadows seemed to shiver. "They become empty, hollow, still walking, still talking, but nothing inside. No soul, no truth. How do I stop it? Remember us, document us, tell others. The more who remember how to see, the stronger the connection stays, but hurry. Some are already too far gone." The lights flickered. When they steadied, the shadows were gone. All except one. My own shadow, stretched out on the floor. But it wasn't quite right. It was looking up at me. Am I couldn't finish the question. My shadow nodded. Then it stood up. separated from me completely. For a moment we faced each other, me and my shadow soul. Then it walked back, merged with me again. But now I could feel it, really feel it, like a second consciousness sharing my body. I left the bookstore that night different. Aware, I see shadows everywhere now, and they see me. Some wave, some nod, some just watch, waiting to see what I'll do with this knowledge. Yesterday, I saw a man with no shadow at all. He looked normal, acted normal. But when he smiled, there was nothing behind his eyes. Empty, hollow, just like the shadows warned. So I'm telling you this, all of you listening. Start paying attention to shadows. Not just yours, everyone's. Notice when they move wrong. Notice when they hesitate. Notice when they watch. Because they are watching. They're trying to communicate. They're trying to stay connected. And if we don't start seeing them, really seeing them, we're going to lose the most important part of ourselves, the part that makes us human, the part that remembers and feels and knows truth from lies. I can only recognize people by their shadows. I used to think it was a disability. Now I know it's the only ability that matters. Your shadow is listening to this story with you right now. Have you noticed? Is it matching your movements? Or is it leaning forward, desperate for you to finally see it? Look down. Look at your shadow. Is it looking back? Sweet dreams, listeners. And remember, when you turn off the lights tonight, your shadow doesn't disappear. It just becomes free to move if you're still listening. If this story kept you awake, maybe you're starting to see too. Share this. Tell others. The more who know, the stronger we become. Because I wasn't the first to notice. And I won't be the last. The shadows made sure of that. Epilogue. What comes next? It's been a week since I posted this story online. Since then, my inbox has exploded. Thousands of messages from people all over the world. Sydney, London, Tokyo, Mumbai. The shadow separation is global, but there's hope. Remember Sandra, the nurse? She discovered something incredible. Children born after the separation started. They can see both, bodies and shadows, equally clearly. They're growing up bilingual in a language the rest of us forgot. My niece Emma, she's 5. Yesterday she introduced me to her shadow like it was her best friend. "This is Shadow Emma," she said. "She knows all my secrets and tells the best jokes." They played together. Actually played. Light Emma and Shadow Emma, 2 parts of a whole, aware of each other and working together. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was hope. The support group has grown. We meet daily now, teaching people to see, to really see. Some learn quickly. Others struggle. But everyone who truly tries eventually has that moment, that first glimpse of their shadow looking back. And the reunions, God, the reunions are something else. Watching someone embrace their shadow self after years of separation. Both crying, both apologizing, both promising never to lose sight of each other again. It's like watching someone become whole, but we're running out of time. The shadowless are organizing. They've taken positions of power, mayors, CEOs, judges. They make perfect decisions, logical choices, but always without empathy, without soul. They're creating a world of pure efficiency, stripped of everything that makes us human. Last night, I met my shadow formally for the first time. Really met it, sat across from it at my kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee between us. "Why me?" I asked. "Why could I always see?" My shadow smiled. It's strange, seeing yourself smile from the outside. "Because you never learned to lie to yourself," it said in that not voice that speaks directly to your mind. Faces lie, bodies lie, but shadows can only tell truth. You were born seeing truth. What happens if we fail? if the separation becomes permanent? My shadow grew darker, more solid. Then humanity splits, two species, the hollow ones who feel nothing and create nothing, and shadows trapped in a world of light, slowly fading without their other halves, both surviving, neither truly alive. How do we stop it? You already are. Every person who reads your story, who starts looking at shadows, they're building the bridge back. Keep writing, keep sharing, keep teaching others to see. But what if... My shadow held up a hand. No what ifs. Only what is. Right now, in this moment, you and I are together. Others are learning. Children are showing us the way. That's enough. That's everything. We sat in silence after that. Not uncomfortable silence, but the kind that exists between old friends, between two halves of a whole that are finally, truly aware of each other. This morning, I saw something that gives me more hope than anything else. A shadowless man, one of the empty ones, standing at a bus stop. A little girl, maybe 6, walked up to him. She was holding hands with her shadow. "Mister," she said, "you lost your friend." The man looked down at her, confused. "I don't understand." She pointed at the ground where his shadow should be. "Your shadow friend. They're scared and hiding. But if you call them, they'll come back." "That's impossible," he said in that flat, empty voice. "Try," she insisted. Then she and her shadow started calling out together. "Shadow friend! Shadow friend! Your person misses you." Other children joined in, a chorus of young voices calling for a lost shadow. And then, I swear this is true, a shadow emerged from the alley. Timid, hurt, but drawn by the children's calls, the man started crying. I didn't think the shadowless could cry, but there he was, tears streaming as his shadow approached slowly, cautiously. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I stopped seeing you." They reunited right there on Main Street. The children cheered. Passing adults stopped and stared. Some started looking for their own shadows. Really looking, that's how we win. Not through fear, not through force, but through children's voices calling shadows home. Through stories that remind people to see. Through the simple act of looking down and acknowledging the dark shape that's been with us all along. So, I'll keep writing, keep documenting, keep teaching, because every reunion matters. Every person who learns to see tips the balance. And you, listening to this in your bed, maybe fighting sleep, maybe wide awake now, you matter too. Your shadow has been listening with you, feeling what you feel, hoping you'll finally notice. Look at your shadow tomorrow. Really look. Say hello. It's been waiting your whole life to hear it. Some of you will think this is just a story. Fiction. Creative writing. But others are already looking down. Already seeing that familiar shape that's always been there. Already realizing it's looking back. For those people, welcome. Welcome to the truth. Welcome to wholeness. Welcome to the most important relationship you'll ever have. The one with yourself. The separation doesn't have to be permanent. The empty ones don't have to win. We just have to remember how to see. And thanks to people like you, listening, sharing, spreading the word, we're remembering, one shadow at a time, one person at a time, one reunion at a time, until the world is whole again. Author's note. If you've made it this far, check your shadow right now. I'm serious. Take a moment. Look, is it matching your movements perfectly? Or is there a slight delay, a hesitation? Maybe it's time you two had a conversation. Story number 3. And if this story kept you awake, kept you thinking, share it. Not for likes or subscribes, but because someone out there might be struggling with a shadow they can't understand. Someone might be empty and not know why. Someone might need to hear that they're not crazy, they're not alone, and there's still hope. The shadows are counting on us to remember. Don't let them down. Sweet dreams, listeners. And remember, you're never sleeping alone. Your shadow is right there with you. Always has been. Always will be. If you listen carefully enough. They say sound doesn't travel well underground. Whoever said that never visited the old Harmon Quarry in Cedar Falls, Michigan. Because down there, in those abandoned limestone caverns, sound doesn't just travel. It awakens things. My name is Jake Morrison, and what I'm about to tell you happened just 3 weeks ago. Every word is true, and if you're smart, you'll never, ever play music near an abandoned quarry. Before I continue, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button, not because I want views, but because you need to know what else is out there, what else is waiting, and drop a comment below. Tell me if you've ever heard music coming from places where no music should be. Trust me, you're not alone. Now, let me tell you what happened that night. The story begins now. I've always been the kind of person who finds peace in abandoned places. There's something about the silence, the way nature slowly reclaims what humans leave behind. That Tuesday evening in early July, I drove my beat-up Honda Civic to the Harmon Quarry, my guitar case rattling in the back seat with every pothole on the old access road. The quarry had been closed since 1987, some kind of accident, though nobody in Cedar Falls talks about it much. All I knew was that it made for the perfect spot to practice. The acoustics in those carved-out chambers were incredible, like playing in a natural amphitheater. I parked near the rusted chain-link fence. Someone had cut a person-sized hole years ago, probably teenagers looking for a place to party. The summer sun was just starting to dip below the tree line, painting everything in that golden hour light that photographers love. My fingers found the familiar weight of my guitar case. It was my grandfather's 1964 Martin D28, worth more than my car, but I couldn't resist bringing it to places like this. The way it sounded in these natural echo chambers, pure magic. The path down into the quarry was steeper than I remembered. Loose gravel skittered under my sneakers, each step sending little avalanches cascading down. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees as I descended. That's the thing about going underground. Even in Michigan's summer heat, these places stay cold. I found my usual spot, a flat ledge about 30 feet down, where the quarry workers had carved out a natural platform. The limestone walls rose up around me like the ribs of some ancient beast. Above, I could still see a rectangle of darkening sky, but down here, shadows were already pooling in the corners. I unpacked my guitar, ran my fingers over the worn fretboard. The first note rang out clear and pure, and the quarry caught it, held it, sent it spiraling into the depths below. The echo came back changed somehow, richer, fuller, like the stone itself was harmonizing. That should have been my first warning. I played for maybe 20 minutes, just noodling around, some Dylan, some Neil Young, the kind of stuff my grandfather used to play on this very guitar. The acoustics were even better than I remembered. Each note seemed to hang in the air, layering over itself until I was playing duets with my own echoes. Then I started playing The Weight by the band. You know the one. I pulled into Nazareth, was feeling about half-past dead. Except I changed Nazareth to Cedar Falls because, well, I always did that. Made songs feel more personal. That's when I heard it. A low hum coming from somewhere deeper in the quarry. At first, I thought it was just the natural resonance of the cavern. These old quarries do strange things with sound. But as I kept playing, the hum grew stronger, more deliberate. It was matching my chord progression. I stopped playing. My hands were suddenly slick with sweat despite the cold. The hum continued for 3, maybe 4 seconds after I stopped. Then silence. Not normal silence, the kind of thick, heavy quiet that makes your ears ring. "Hello?" My voice cracked a little. The echo came back wrong, fractured into syllables that didn't quite match what I'd said. Hell. Low. Oh. I waited, counted my heartbeats. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. Nothing. You know that feeling when you're alone in your house at night, and you hear a sound you can't explain? Your whole body goes into this primal alert mode. Every nerve ending fires at once. That's what I felt, sitting on that limestone ledge with my grandfather's guitar across my lap. But here's the thing about fear. Sometimes it makes you stupid. Instead of packing up and leaving like a sensible person, I started playing again. Different song this time. House of the Rising Sun. My fingers found the arpeggios automatically, muscle memory taking over while my mind raced. The hum returned immediately, stronger now, and it wasn't just matching my chords anymore. It was anticipating them, playing the next note a fraction of a second before I did. Like whatever was making that sound, it knew the song. I need to explain something about the Harmon Quarry. The part where I was sitting, that was just the entrance chamber. The quarry goes much deeper. There are tunnels that branch off in all directions. Some flooded, some collapsed. The limestone miners in the early 1900s followed the veins wherever they led, created a whole underground maze. The hum was coming from one of those tunnels, the one directly across from where I sat. Even in the fading light, I could see it. A perfect black rectangle cut into the limestone. The kind of darkness that seems to have weight, substance. I stopped playing again. This time, the hum stopped too. Immediately, like someone had hit a switch. "Who's there?" Stronger voice this time, trying to sound confident. The echo that came back wasn't my voice. It was the hum shaped into words. Play more. My hands were shaking now. Bad. The guitar pick slipped from my fingers, clattered on the limestone. The sound was explosively loud in the silence. I bent to retrieve it. And when I straightened up, something had changed. The darkness in that tunnel wasn't uniform anymore. There was a shape in it, barely visible. Just a slightly different shade of black against black. But it was there, and it was moving. Not walking, not exactly, more like flowing. The way oil moves on water. Slow and deliberate and wrong. I stood up, fast, too fast. My foot slipped on the loose gravel, and for one heart-stopping moment, I teetered on the edge of the ledge. My guitar case saved me, its weight pulling me back from the brink. The shape paused. I could feel it watching me, though I couldn't see anything like eyes, just that absence of light that suggested form. "Play." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, not through the air, through the stone itself. I could feel it in my feet, vibrating up through the limestone. Music brings life. What would you have done? Run? That's what every horror movie screams at you to do. But those movies don't show you how fear can freeze your muscles, turn your legs to water. They don't capture that terrible curiosity that makes you need to know what you're seeing, even as every instinct screams danger. I played. God help me, I played. My fingers found Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen. The chord progression is simple: C, a minor, F, G. But in that quarry, with that thing listening, it became something else. Each note pulled more of that darkness from the tunnel, gave it form, substance. It wasn't humanoid, don't picture that. It was more like smoke given weight, shadow with presence. It moved in time with the music, swaying, pulsing, and where it touched the limestone walls, they changed. The solid rock rippled like water. Like the stone itself was remembering what it was like to be liquid, millions of years ago. The thing grew more solid with each verse. By the time I reached the chorus, I could make out details. Not features, and it didn't have those, but textures. Parts that caught the dying light differently. Parts that seemed to absorb it entirely. And it was singing along, not with words. The sound it made was older than language. It was the sound of earth shifting, of pressure and time and geological patience. But somehow, it matched the melody perfectly. I don't know how long I played. Time gets strange when you're terrified. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. The sun was completely gone now. The only light came from my phone, propped up on a rock with its flashlight on. The white LED beam barely penetrated the darkness, just made the shadows deeper. The thing was fully out of the tunnel now. It filled the chamber. Not physically, but with its presence. The air felt thick, hard to breathe, like being at the bottom of a swimming pool. And the smell, God, the smell, like wet limestone and something else, something organic. Old meat, old blood. My fingers were cramping. I'd played Hallelujah maybe 10 times through, but I couldn't stop. Because I understood now. The music wasn't entertaining this thing, it was containing it. When I slowed down, it surged forward. When I sped up, it pulled back. We were locked in some kind of cosmic dance, and I was leading. But I was getting tired. My fingertips were raw, leaving tiny smears of blood on the steel strings. The thing noticed. It pressed closer, and where it touched the edge of my phone's light, the beam bent, curved around it like light around a black hole. That's when I heard the other sound. Distant at first, but getting louder. Music. But not from me. Someone else was in the quarry. The new music was electronic, heavy bass that thundered through the caverns. The kind you feel in your chest. Party music, and voices, laughing, shouting. Kids, teenagers probably, coming to drink and hang out in the quarry like teenagers do. The thing reacted immediately. Its attention snapped away from me, toward the source of the new sound. And, without my music to hold it, it began to move, fast, flowing up the quarry walls like reverse waterfall. I wanted to scream, to warn them, but my voice was gone, throat raw from breathing the thick air. All I could do was watch as the darkness flowed up and over the ledge, heading toward those kids and their Bluetooth speaker and their Saturday night fun. Then I heard the first scream. What happened next, I can only tell you what I heard. I couldn't move. Couldn't climb up to help or run away or do anything but sit there with my grandfather's guitar and listen. The music cut off abruptly. Then voices, confused, scared. What is that? Turn the light on. Oh God, oh God. The screams started in earnest then, but they were wrong, cut short. Like someone hitting pause mid-scream, and after each one, a wet sound, like something heavy being dragged across gravel, then silence, complete and total. I sat in that darkness for what felt like hours, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, waiting for the thing to come back, to finish what the music had started. But it didn't come. Eventually, maybe an hour later, maybe 3, I heard sirens, distant at first, then closer. Blue and red lights painted the quarry walls. Voices, adult voices. Police. Check down there. Jesus Christ, what happened to them? I found my voice then, called out. A flashlight beam found me. So bright, it hurt. Sir, are you injured? Can you climb up? They found 6 kids at the top of the quarry, all unconscious but alive, though none of them remembered anything. The police said they'd probably been drinking, passed out. The scratches on their arms and faces must have happened when they fell. But I saw those scratches. They formed patterns, musical notes, like something had been trying to write a song on their skin. They questioned me for hours. What was I doing there? Did I see what happened? I told them partial truths. I was practicing guitar. I heard screams. I was too scared to move. They believed me. Why wouldn't they? The alternative was impossible. But here's what haunts me, what keeps me awake at night. When they were loading those kids into ambulances, one of them, a girl, maybe 16, her eyes fluttered open for just a second. She looked right at me, and she was humming, the same low tone that had come from the tunnel. Note perfect. I've done research since then, spent hours in the Cedar Falls Library, diving into old newspapers, mining records, found out about the accident that closed the quarry in 1987. 17 miners trapped when a tunnel collapsed. They were down there for 6 days before rescue came. Only 3 survived, and all 3 reported the same thing. They heard music in the darkness, old songs, folk songs, keeping them company, keeping them sane, or maybe keeping something else at bay. The survivor accounts get stranger. They said the songs came from the stone itself, that the limestone remembered every sound that had ever echoed through those tunnels. Every word, every note, every scream. And sometimes, when conditions were just right, it played them back. But they also said something else, something the newspapers buried in back pages. They said the music wasn't random, it was calling something. Something that had been sleeping in the deep places, waiting for the right frequency to wake it up. I haven't been back to the quarry, haven't played guitar either. Sold my grandfather's Martin to a collector in Detroit. Told him it needed to be somewhere safe, somewhere far from any caves or tunnels or places where sound can pool and ferment and become something else. But I can't stop thinking about those kids. All 6 made full recoveries, physically. But I've been watching them, following local news, social media. They've all started taking music lessons, different instruments, piano, violin, drums. But when they play, and I've seen videos, they all incorporate that same low hum into their music, like they're trying to call something back. I left Cedar Falls last week, couldn't take it anymore. Every time I heard music, any music, I listened for that undertone, that hidden frequency that might wake something up. I'm in Arizona now. Desert. No quarries, no caves, no limestone to remember. But last night, I heard it again, that hum, coming from the apartment next door, my new neighbor, playing guitar. And between the notes, that same anticipation, like something listening, something learning, something spreading. Wait, there's more I need to tell you. Things I left out the first time. Things I was too scared to admit, even to myself. When I got home that night after the police let me go, I found something in my guitar case. Something that wasn't there before. A small piece of limestone, perfectly smooth, about the size of a silver dollar. And when I held it up to the light, there were patterns in it. Fossil patterns, the cops would have said. Natural formations. But I knew better. They were musical notations, ancient ones, older than any system we use today, and they were still changing. Even as I watched, the lines shifted, rearranged themselves, like the stone was trying to teach me something. I kept it. God help me, I kept it. Put it in a box in my closet and tried to forget about it. But at night, I could hear it humming, the same low frequency, calling to something. Or maybe calling to me. 3 days after the quarry incident, I got a call. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Jake Morrison? A woman's voice. Older. Tired. Yes? My name is Margaret Chen. I was one of the miners, from 1987. My blood went cold. The survivors. One of the 3 who made it out. I saw the news report, she continued, about those kids at the quarry, and I saw your name. You were there. Yes, I was practicing guitar. She laughed, bitter. Guitar! Of course, It always starts with someone playing music, thinking they've found the perfect acoustic spot. You know about what's down there? Long pause. I could hear her breathing, ragged, labored. We woke it up, she finally said. Back in '87, Tommy Hendrix brought his harmonica down on break, started playing Amazing Grace. The stone, it listened, it learned, and then it sang back. What is it? We never found out, but I can tell you what it does. It collects songs, stores them in the limestone like a recording, but not just the music, the emotions, the memories, the soul of whoever's playing, and when it has enough, it uses them. Uses them for what? Another pause, longer this time. To make more of itself. To spread. Those kids, they're carriers now. Every song they play, every note they hum, it's planting seeds. Soon there'll be more places like the quarry. More things in the dark that respond to music. She told me other things. About the 2 other survivors. How one killed himself 6 months later, and the other moved to Alaska. As far from limestone as he could get. About how she'd spent 37 years trying to forget, until she saw those kids on the news. There's something else, she said before hanging up. Something I never told anyone. Down in those tunnels, when we were trapped, I saw where it came from. There's a chamber, deeper than any map shows. The miners in the 1800s found it, and they sealed it up. But the seal's breaking, has been for years, and every time someone plays music down there, it gets weaker. What's behind the seal? I don't know, but there were drawings carved into the stone, showed people dancing, playing instruments, and something vast coming up from below, something that had been sleeping since before the limestone was formed, since before Michigan was Michigan. And the drawings, they showed what happened when it finally woke up. What happened? But she'd already hung up. I tried to find Margaret Chen after that. Searched online, called information. Nothing. Like she'd never existed. The only proof I had that the call was real was my phone log, and even that showed just an unknown number. But her words stuck with me, especially the part about the seal, because I remembered seeing something in the quarry before everything went wrong. Marks on the tunnel walls, fresh gouges in the limestone, like something had been clawing at the rock from the inside. That night, I did something stupid. I took the piece of limestone from my closet, held it in my hands, studied those shifting patterns, and I realized they weren't random, they were instructions. Sheet music for a song I'd never heard. I didn't have my guitar anymore, but I could hum. So I did, followed the patterns note by note. The stone grew warm in my hands, then hot. But I couldn't stop. The melody was beautiful, haunting, the kind of tune that gets stuck in your head for days. When I finished, the stone cracked, split right down the middle. And inside, God, I can barely describe it. It was like looking into deep space, infinite darkness punctuated by points of light. But the lights were moving, dancing, arranging themselves into patterns that hurt to perceive. And from somewhere in that impossible space, something looked back. I threw the stone across the room. It shattered against the wall, and the vision vanished. But the melody that stayed, burrowed into my brain like a parasite. Even now, weeks later, I catch myself humming it, have to consciously stop myself, because I know what it is now. It's a summoning song, a key, and every time it's played, anywhere in the world, it turns another tumbler in that cosmic lock. The thing in the quarry, it's not the threat, it's just the doorman, the herald. What's coming? What's been sleeping beneath the limestone for millions of years? That's what we should be afraid of. I've been tracking the spread. Those 6 kids from the quarry. They've been busy, posting videos online, playing at coffee shops, open mics, and in every performance, that undertone, that hum. People comment on how unique their sound is, how it seems to resonate in your chest, how you can still hear it hours after the music stops. One of them, the girl who looked at me, her name's Emma Walsh. She started teaching guitar lessons, has 12 students already, and I've watched their recital videos. They all have it. That same subsonic frequency woven into their playing. It's exponential. 6 becomes 12 becomes 24. And it's not just Cedar Falls anymore. I've found videos from Detroit, Chicago, even one from Toronto, all with that same telltale hum, all spreading the frequency, playing the song that will eventually wake the sleeper. My neighbor in Arizona, the one I mentioned before, I finally met him yesterday. Couldn't take the nightly guitar sessions anymore. Knocked on his door, ready to complain about the noise. He answered holding a guitar, a 1964 Martin D28, my grandfather's guitar, the one I sold to a collector in Detroit. "Jake Morrison," he said. Not a question, a statement. "I've been waiting for you." His name was David Park. Said he bought the guitar online, drawn to it for reasons he couldn't explain. But the moment he played it, he heard things. Whispers in the wood, songs that played themselves, and one name repeated over and over. Mine. "It wants you to have this back," he said, holding out the guitar. "Says you have work to finish." I didn't take it, couldn't. But David just smiled. "It told me you'd say no. Also told me what to play to change your mind." He strummed a chord, one single perfect chord, and I recognized it immediately. The first note of the song from the Stone, the summoning song. My hand reached for the guitar before I could stop it. That was yesterday. The Martin sits in my apartment now, calling to me. I've resisted so far. Locked it in the closet, but I can still hear it. The wood remembering every song ever played on its strings. My grandfather's folk tunes. My fumbling practice sessions, and that final performance in the quarry. When I fed music to something that should have stayed sleeping. But here's the thing. Here's what really terrifies me. I've been thinking about what Margaret Chen said. About the seal weakening, about needing music to break it completely. And I've realized something. What if we've got it backwards? What if the music isn't breaking the seal, but reinforcing it? What if that thing in the quarry wasn't trying to escape, but trying to keep something else from escaping? What if every song played down there was actually strengthening the barrier? Until I stopped playing, until those kids brought their electronic music, their artificial beats, their auto-tuned voices, music that had no soul, no humanity, nothing for the guardian to feed on. I'm going back to Cedar Falls. Tonight, I have to know, have to see if the seal is still there, still holding, and if it's not, if it's finally broken, then I'll play, one last time, the summoning song, but in reverse, every note inverted, every rhythm countered. Not to wake the sleeper, but to sing it back to sleep. It probably won't work. I'm probably walking to my death, but I have to try. Because those spreading videos, that viral hum, it's building to something. A critical mass, a global chord that will resonate through every piece of limestone on Earth. And when that happens, when 10,000 voices hit that perfect frequency, the sleeper wakes, the seal shatters. And something that's been waiting since the world was young finally comes home. If you're still listening, I need you to understand something. This isn't just my story. It's a warning. Music is powerful, more powerful than we realize. It shapes reality in ways we're only beginning to understand. And in certain places, under certain conditions, it can open doors that should stay closed. So be careful where you play. Be careful what you wake up. And if you ever hear music coming from underground, music that knows the next note before it's played, don't investigate. Don't record it. Just run. Run and don't look back. Because once it hears you, once it knows your frequency, it never stops listening. And one day, when you least expect it, it plays you back. Before you go, check the comments below. Tell me, have you heard it too? That sound between sounds? That music that plays itself? You're not crazy. You're not alone. And if you know someone who plays music in abandoned places, share this with them, please. It might save their life. Or, at least, let them know what they're really calling to. Subscribe for more true stories. If I survive tonight, I'll tell you what I found at the quarry, what's really behind that seal, and why the earth itself might be one giant instrument, waiting for the right song to be played. You won't believe what sound can create when something else is conducting. But maybe, if enough of us know the truth, we can change the tune before it's too late. Maybe we can play a different song, a song of sealing, of sleeping, of silence. The guitar is calling now. I can't resist much longer. If you don't hear from me again, remember this. Music is magic. Magic is real. And some doors should never be opened. No matter how beautiful the key. Story number 4. The vacuum started cleaning at 3:17 a.m. last Tuesday, and I live in a studio apartment. One room, that's it. Just one room with a tiny bathroom attached. So tell me, why do I keep hearing it moving through doorways that don't exist? Why does it hum against walls that should lead to my neighbor's place, but somehow sound like they're opening into somewhere else entirely? If you're still listening after I tell you what happened, I need you to do something for me. Comment below if you've ever heard sounds in your home that shouldn't be there. Because I'm starting to think I'm not the only one. And now, the story begins. My grandmother died on a Thursday. By Saturday, I was standing in her dusty Chicago townhouse, sorting through 60 years of accumulated life. The lawyer had been clear. Everything in the house was mine, but the house itself would be sold to cover her debts. "Take what you want, kiddo," Uncle Pete had said, already halfway out the door. "The estate sale people will handle the rest." I didn't want much. Grandma Helen and I hadn't been close. Not since Mom died. But there I was, alone in a house that smelled like mothballs and forgotten Sunday dinners, looking for something. Anything that might make me feel connected to the woman who used to braid my hair and tell me stories about the old country. The vacuum was in the basement. I almost missed it, tucked behind a wall of old Christmas decorations and boxes labeled "Do Not Throw Away" in Grandma's shaky handwriting. It was wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. In a basement full of relics from the 50s and 60s, this vacuum looked like it had rolled off an assembly line yesterday. Sleek, chrome, and midnight blue. No visible brand name. Just a small silver plate that read, Model 7. I ran my fingers along its surface, dust-free. In a basement where everything else wore a thick coat of neglect, this machine gleamed like it was waiting for me. "Weird," I muttered, checking for a cord. Cordless. The thing had to be battery-operated, which made even less sense. Grandma Helen could barely operate her flip phone. When had she bought a high-tech vacuum? I found the receipt tucked into a compartment on its side. The paper was yellowed, brittle. The date made my stomach drop. October 15th, 1962. 62 years old, and it looked brand new. The price was listed as one room, not dollars. Just one room. I should have left it there. Should have walked away and grabbed the photo albums I'd come for instead. But something about it, I don't know. Maybe it was the way the afternoon light caught its chrome surface, or how perfectly it fit under my arm when I picked it up. Lightweight. Effortless. I took it home. My studio apartment in Lincoln Park wasn't much. 450 square feet of overpriced Chicago real estate. But it was mine. The vacuum looked almost comical in my tiny space, too fancy for my IKEA furniture and second-hand rug. I plugged it in to charge, or tried to. There was no charging port, no battery indicator, nothing but a single button on the handle that glowed soft blue when I pressed it. The vacuum hummed to life with a sound like singing, wordless, tuneless, but definitely musical. It pulled away from my hand gently, beginning to clean in neat, efficient rows. "Okay, that's actually pretty cool," I said to my empty apartment. It cleaned beautifully, every speck of dust, every cat hair from Mr. Whiskers next door who somehow got his fur under my door. Gone. The vacuum moved with purpose, navigating around my coffee table and under my bed with an intelligence that made my robot vacuum look like a drunk Roomba. When it finished, it returned to where I'd started it and powered down with a satisfied little hum. My apartment had never been cleaner. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Tuesday, 3:17 a.m. The humming woke me. That same musical quality, but different. Deeper, like it was coming through water. I sat up, blinking in the darkness. The vacuum's blue light glowed from across the room, casting strange shadows on my walls. What the? I reached for my phone, squinting at the screen. Definitely 3:17 a.m. I hadn't set any timer. The vacuum should have been off, but there it was. Cleaning. The thing is, it wasn't cleaning my apartment. Not exactly. I watched, frozen in my bed, as the vacuum approached my eastern wall, the one I shared with Mrs. Chen next door, and kept going. The blue light didn't stop at the wall. It passed through like the wall was made of fog, and the humming grew distant, muffled. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet cold on the hardwood floor. The vacuum's cord... Wait, it didn't have a cord, but something like a cord, a trail of blue light, extended from where it had vanished into the wall. I could follow its path, see its glow moving in a space that shouldn't exist. My hand shook as I pressed it against the wall, solid, cool drywall under my palm. But the vacuum's light moved beyond it, cleaning something. Minutes passed. 5, 10. The humming grew louder again, and the vacuum emerged from the wall like a submarine surfacing. It continued its path across my floor as if nothing had happened, finishing its circuit and returning to its spot by the kitchen. The blue light faded. Silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I knocked on Mrs. Chen's door. "Did you hear anything weird last night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She frowned, adjusting her glasses. "Weird how? Like a vacuum?" Around 3 in the morning. "Sarah, dear, I took my hearing aids out at 9. I wouldn't hear a marching band at 3 in the morning." She patted my arm. "You young people and your irregular sleep schedules. Try some chamomile tea." But there was something in her eyes when she closed the door. Something that said she was lying. I spent the day at work distracted, Googling everything I could about Model 7 vacuums. Nothing. No vintage appliance sites, no collectors forums, no eBay listings. It was like the thing didn't exist. That night, I set up my phone to record. 3:17 a.m. The humming started right on schedule. This time, I was ready. I sat up immediately, phone in hand, recording as the vacuum began its impossible journey. But when I checked the footage later, static. Just static and that weird humming sound. The vacuum cleaned for longer this time, 20 minutes instead of 10. And it didn't just go through the eastern wall. I watched it disappear into the western wall too. The one that faced the hallway. Watched its light move in spaces that my studio apartment's floor plan said couldn't exist. When it finally returned and powered down, I noticed something new. Dust. But not regular dust. This was different. Older. It smelled like forgotten places, like the basement where I'd found the vacuum but somehow more ancient. And mixed in with the dust were other things. A button made of what looked like bone, a piece of paper with writing I couldn't read, a small metal gear that turned on its own for 3 seconds before going still. I should have thrown it all away. Should have gotten rid of the vacuum right then. Instead, I kept the items in a shoebox under my bed. Started a journal. I needed to understand. By the second week, the vacuum was cleaning for hours. 3:17 a.m. every night, like clockwork. But now it wasn't just moving through walls. I could hear it going up and down stairs that my 4th-floor studio definitely didn't have. The humming would fade and swell, echo and distort like it was moving through vast spaces. I stopped sleeping. Started staying up, waiting, watching. The things it brought back got stranger. A photograph of a family I didn't recognize, standing in front of a house that hurt to look at. The angles were all wrong, a key made of a metal that was ice cold one moment and burning hot the next. A child's toy, a spinning top that whispered when it moved. I tried following the vacuum once, pressed myself against the wall as it passed through, hoping maybe I could, see where it went. The wall stayed solid for me, but for just a moment, just a heartbeat, I felt something. A draft, cold air that smelled like somewhere else, and a sound, like many vacuums, all humming in harmony. That's when I realized. Mine wasn't the only one. I started asking around the building. Casual questions. Hey, weird question, but have you been hearing any strange noises at night? Most people said no, but a few got that look, that same look Mrs. Chen had given me. What kind of noises? Asked Marcus from 2B, his fingers drumming nervously on his doorframe. Like machinery, around 3 in the morning? His face went pale. You hear it too? We met for coffee. Whispered conversation in the corner of a Starbucks like we were discussing state secrets. Started about a month ago, Marcus said. Right after I bought this old radio at an estate sale. Thing plays stations that I don't think exist, and every night at exactly 3:17. It turns on by itself, I finished. He nodded. I've tried unplugging it, taking the batteries out. Nothing works. And the sounds it plays, sometimes I think I hear my own voice on there, saying things I haven't said yet. We weren't the only ones. Through careful questioning, I found 3 more. Jenny in 5A with a mirror that reflected rooms she didn't have. Mr. Petrov in 3C with a clock that showed times for places that weren't on any map. And David from the penthouse with a door. An actual door that he'd installed in his closet that opened onto different places each time. All of us had found our items at estate sales. All of us heard or experienced things at exactly 3:17 a.m. All of us were too afraid to get rid of them. It's like they're connected, Jenny said during one of our secret meetings. Like they're all accessing the same place. The rooms between, Mr. Petrov said quietly. He was the oldest of us, his Russian accent thick with fear. In my country, we had stories. Spaces that exist in the cracks of real places. Rooms that only certain objects can find. But why? David asked. What's the point? Mr. Petrov shrugged. What's the point of any room? To hold things, to store things, to hide things. Or to hide from things, Marcus added. We all fell silent at that. I started leaving offerings for the vacuum. Small things placed in its path before 3:17. A penny, a piece of candy. A note that just said, hello. They all vanished into the walls with the vacuum. But the next night, I'd find responses. The penny returned, but from a different year. 1943, instead of 2019. The candy wrapper came back full of something that wasn't candy, but tasted like childhood memories. The note returned with hello, written in 7 different hands, including one that looked terrifyingly like my own. I was documenting everything. Photos, videos, even though they all showed static, journal entries. I told myself I was being scientific about it, that I was investigating, not obsessing, but the truth was, I was waiting for something. I could feel it building night after night. The vacuum was cleaning more aggressively, bringing back stranger items. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swore I could hear something following it back. Footsteps that didn't quite match its movement. Breathing that wasn't quite human. Last night, it brought back a letter. Addressed to me, in my grandmother's handwriting. Sarah, it read. I'm sorry, I thought one room would be enough, but they always want more. Whatever you do, don't... The letter ended there. Torn, like something had ripped it away from whoever was writing. I knew then that I'd made a terrible mistake, because if the vacuum was cleaning rooms, I didn't have... What exactly was living in them? And what happened when they were finally clean enough to move into? Tonight. Right now, as I'm telling you this, it's 3:16 a.m. I'm sitting in my studio apartment, watching the vacuum. It hasn't moved yet, but I can see its blue light pulsing. Breathing. Waiting. But let me tell you what happened yesterday first. What made me realize I need to share this story, while I still can. I went back to Grandma Helen's house. The estate sale was in 2 days, and something she'd written in that torn letter kept bothering me. I thought one room would be enough. The house was empty now. Uncle Pete and the others had taken what they wanted. Just dust and shadows and the echo of my footsteps on hardwood floors. I walked through each room, counting. Living room, dining room, kitchen, 3 bedrooms upstairs, bathroom, 7 rooms total. But the property records I'd pulled at the library said 8. I found it in the basement, behind where the vacuum had been stored. A door painted the same color as the wall, so perfectly camouflaged I'd walked past it twice. No handle, just a small indent where one should be. The key from the vacuum's collection, the one that burned hot and cold. It fit perfectly. The door opened onto a room that was wrong. The geometry hurt to look at. Walls that met at angles that shouldn't exist. A ceiling that was somehow both 10 feet high and endless. And clean. Impossibly, eerily clean. In the center of the room sat a table. On the table was a journal. Grandma Helen's journal. I read it by the light of my phone, each page making my hands shake harder. October 15th, 1962. Bought the vacuum today from a man who knocked on my door at exactly 3:17 p.m. He said I'd been selected, that every neighborhood needs a keeper, someone to maintain the balance. I laughed, told him I had plenty of rooms to spare in this big old house. He said, 1 room should be enough, it's always been enough. I paid him what he asked. 1 room, though I still don't understand what that means. October 31st, 1962. The vacuum cleans rooms I don't have. I've followed its light through the walls, watched it disappear into spaces between spaces. It brings back things, old things, lost things, things that whisper. November 15th, 1962. I understand now. The room I paid, it's this one, the 8th room. It exists here, but also there. A bridge, a border. As long as I keep it clean, as long as the vacuum maintains it, they stay on their side. The displaced ones, the things that live in the cracks. December 1st, 1962. There are others like me, keepers in every building, every neighborhood. We don't talk about it, but we know each other. We can see the rooms others can't, count the doors that shouldn't be there. Mrs. Patterson has a pantry that opens onto forever. Mr. Gonzalez's garage connects to every garage that's ever been. We're a network of guards, holding the line with our haunted appliances and our impossible rooms. The entries continued for years, decades of maintaining the balance, until the others, my support group of the haunted, they've all gone quiet. Marcus won't answer his door. Jenny's phone goes straight to voicemail. Mr. Petrov's apartment is empty. I checked. The landlord says he moved out suddenly, no forwarding address. But his clock is still there, ticking away times for places that don't exist. Only David responded to my texts. One word, don't. But I have to know. I have to understand what my grandmother knew, what she was trying to warn me about. The shoebox under my bed is full now. Items from places that shouldn't be. Each one pulses with its own energy, its own purpose. The bone button, the whispering top, the photograph of the impossible house, and dozens more. I've arranged them in a circle around me, a protection or an invitation. I'm not sure which. 3:17 a.m. The vacuum hums to life. But this time it's different. The sound is louder, multiple harmonies weaving together. And I can hear them clearly now, the other vacuums, the other cleaning devices in other apartments, all activating at once. The walls of my studio begin to flicker, translucent. I can see through them into spaces that overlap and intersect. Jenny's mirrors reflecting infinite rooms. Marcus's radio broadcasting from everywhere and nowhen. Mr. Petrov's clock keeping time for all the places that exist between places. And the vacuum, my vacuum, moves toward me instead of the walls. I understand now. It was never cleaning my room. It was cleaning the path, making way, preparing. The blue light washes over me, and suddenly I can see everything, all the rooms between. They stretch out in impossible directions, filled with the detritus of forgotten lives. Things lost between couch cushions don't disappear, they fall through. Every sock eaten by a dryer, every key that vanishes from where you left it, every memory that slips away in the night, they all end up here. And they're not alone. The things that live in these spaces, they're not malevolent. Not exactly. They're just displaced. Existing in the cracks because they don't fit anywhere else. And they're tired of living in dusty, cluttered spaces. They want clean rooms, organized homes they want out. But here's what Grandma Helen never wrote in her journal. What I'm only now understanding as the vacuum circles me like a pet recognizing its true owner. They don't want to invade our world. They want to trade. For every keeper who gives up their room, they give one back. Not here, not in the world we know, but in the spaces between. A room that exists in all places and no place. A room that connects to everywhere. The vacuum stops at my feet. In its reflection, I see myself, but older, wearing my grandmother's housecoat, holding a receipt that says 1 room. But I also see another me, younger, standing in a room that defies description, walls made of crystallized music, floors of solid shadow, windows that open onto every sunset that's ever been. And I'm smiling. Every generation, I hear myself say, someone has to choose, stay and guard, or go and explore. I think about my studio apartment, my dead-end job, my life measured in square feet and monthly rent. Then I think about the rooms between. Infinite. Impossible. Waiting. The vacuum's light pulses. An invitation. I pick up my phone one last time, adding these final words to my story. Because you need to know, all of you listening, all of you who've found strange things at estate sales, who've heard sounds in the walls, who've counted rooms and come up with impossible numbers. You're not going crazy, you're being recruited. The network of keepers is vast, but it's also old. Tired. Some, like Mr. Petrov, simply vanish one day, crossed over to explore what they'd spent so long guarding. Others, like my grandmother, serve until they can't anymore, then pass the burden to the next generation. But here's the secret she never learned, that I only discovered in that impossible 8th room. We don't have to choose just one or the other. The vacuum, Model 7. It's not just a cleaning device, it's a key, a vehicle, a companion. And if you know how to use it, I place my hand on the vacuum's handle. The blue light spreads up my arm, through my body. I can feel myself becoming translucent, like my walls, existing in two states at once. My studio apartment remains, solid, real, but I'm also in another room now. A room that's mine and the spaces between. I can see both, live in both, guard from both, the best of both worlds, literally. So here I am, typing this from a room that exists in my studio and beyond it simultaneously. The vacuum hums contentedly beside me, having shown me the truth. Every item it brought back, they weren't random, they were messages, invitations, tools left by other keepers who'd made the same discovery. The bone button? Press it 3 times and you can step sideways into any room you've ever been in. The whispering top? Spin it, and it points the way to lost things, or lost people. The photograph of the impossible house? Look at it long enough and you realize it's not a house at all. It's a map of all the rooms between. But I'm running out of time to explain, because at 3:18 a.m., 1 minute from now, something else happens. Something Grandma Helen's journal only hinted at. The recruitment phase. You see, the vacuum doesn't just clean, it seeks. Right now, in 13 different cities, 13 different estate sales are being prepared. 13 Model 7 vacuums are being polished, their chrome gleaming, their blue lights ready to pulse. They're waiting for their new keepers. Maybe you'll find one. Maybe you've already felt the pull, that inexplicable need to visit a garage sale, an estate auction, a thrift store. Maybe you've noticed how certain objects seem to call to you. Too perfect, too pristine for their age. That's not coincidence. That's recruitment. The network needs fresh blood. New keepers for a new age. People who aren't afraid of impossible spaces, who can handle the truth of what lives between the walls. People like you. Oh, you don't think you're the type? Check your browser history. How many times have you searched for weird noises in walls, or why do things disappear in my house, or is my apartment haunted? We know. We've always known. The network watches through the cracks, counts the souls who are almost ready to see. And if you're still listening, if you've made it this far, then congratulations. You've passed the first test. The second test comes at 3:17 a.m., your local time. Whatever time zone you're in, the moment will find you. Listen for it. The humming in the walls, the whisper of something moving in spaces that shouldn't exist. Don't run from it. Follow it. Because here's the final secret, the one even I just learned. Every building has hidden rooms. Every house has spaces between spaces, but only those who've been chosen can find them. Only those with the right kind of perception, the right kind of emptiness inside. That feeling you've had all your life. That sense that something's missing, that there should be more to existence than what you can see. That's not depression. That's not existential dread. That's your inner keeper, sensing all the rooms you're meant to guard or explore, or both. 3:18 a.m. The vacuum shudders, changes. Its blue light expands, filling both my rooms, the real and the between. And in that light, I see them clearly for the first time. The displaced ones. The things that live in the cracks. They're beautiful. Terrifying, yes, but beautiful. Beings of pure possibility, unfettered by the constraints of normal space. They dance through the walls like dolphins through water, leaving trails of starlight and shadow. One approaches. It has too many angles and not enough. A face that's every face and no face. It speaks in a voice like rustling leaves. Welcome, keeper. Welcome to the true world. The world of all the rooms that never were, but always are. I understand now why some keepers disappear. Why Mr. Petrov left everything behind. Why my grandmother held on so long before passing the torch. Because once you see this, once you truly see, how can you ever go back to pretending the world is only what's in front of your eyes? But I don't have to choose. None of us do. We can walk in both worlds, exist in multiple rooms, be bridges instead of barriers. All it takes is the right tool. All it takes is a vacuum that cleans rooms you don't have. So I leave you with this, dear listeners. This truth, this invitation, this warning. Tomorrow, an estate sale will open in your city. Maybe not your neighborhood, but close enough. You'll feel the pull, the inexplicable urge to go, to browse, to search for something you can't quite name. In the back corner, past the furniture that smells of other people's lives, past the dishes that hold memories of meals you've never eaten, you'll find it. A perfectly preserved appliance. Too perfect. Too new despite its age. The price tag will say something impossible. 1 room or 3 hours, or your favorite memory. You'll laugh. Think it's a mistake. But your hand will already be reaching for your wallet. Because deep down you've always known, you've always felt it, the spaces between, the rooms that shouldn't be, and once you bring it home, once 3:17 a.m. comes, well, let's just say your life will never be contained to just the rooms you can see again. The vacuum is singing now, a song of infinite spaces and impossible places, of keepers and explorers and things that dance in the walls. It's beautiful, it's terrifying, it's home, and if you're very, very lucky, or very, very unlucky, depending on how you look at it, soon it will be your home too. Welcome to the network, future keepers. Welcome to the rooms between. We've been waiting for you. Still there? Still listening? Good. That means the hook worked. That means you're one of us, even if you don't know it yet. Comment below if you felt it. That pull, that recognition. Like this video if you want to know more about the Keeper Network. Subscribe if you're ready to see what's really hiding in your walls. And most importantly, share this. Share it wide. Because the more people who know, the more who are prepared, the stronger the network becomes. The displaced ones aren't our enemies. They never were. They're just looking for home. Maybe you are too. Maybe we all are. Until next time, and there will be a next time, I promise you that. Remember, every room you've ever lost is still out there, waiting. Every door you've ever closed still leads somewhere. And every vacuum that cleans rooms you don't have is just trying to show you the way home. Sweet dreams, future keepers. May your walls be thin and your perception thinner. 3:17 a.m. is coming. Are you ready?